What was the most disturbing thing you saw in person? Someone jumping off of a building. I'm haunted by the mental image of blood/cranial matter splattered around a very limp body. Around the age of 5 I was living with my family on my grandfather's farm. One day while my father was working I was home alone with my mother. She went to take a bath while I was watching TV. After my show ended I realized she wasn't anywhere in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. It was a trailer home so not big. I went to check the only bathroom and she was completely submerged underneath the bathwater from having a seizure. I ran to go get my grandfather and called 911 like I was taught as he tried to revive her via CPR. The paramedics eventually arrive and are able to revive her but only for a brief period before her heart gives out again and they pronounce her dead. TLDR, I found my mother's corpse when I was 5. When I was about 9 years old our family was staying at a campground on a river in northern Michigan. A 2-year-old boy had wandered off and was missing. The entire park was looking for him. After about 2 hours with no luck some of us began looking in the water at the ends of the docks nearby. When I dove down in about 4 of water I found him floating just off the bottom of the river. I pulled him to the surface and shouted for help. The EMTs made an effort to resuscitate him. To no avail. As horrible as that was, the thing that I will never forget was the sound his mother made when I carried him ashore. I still enjoy boating and swimming, but I have a very healthy respect for the water. A prisoner with his throat cut and his lunch coming out. An elderly man on a bike get hit by a truck. I had to hold his head together with my shirt to try and stop the bleeding until the ambulance came. Probably seeing the burn marks on a pediatric patient who was desperate for help due to persistent essay from a family member. Never been so pissed in my life at someone I had never met. Wish I could have broken the perpetrator's orbitals, so he could never look at another child the same way again. A man that was pulled into a wood chipper. Arm and half of head gone before they got it shut down. A person with half their head gone because of attempted suicide with a shotgun. Watched a woman get stabbed to death by her baby daddy in front of their kid. He said later he did it cause he didn't want her to take care of the kid. Happened right outside my school too. Human body parts moments after they got hit by a semi-truck. An arm about 35 feet from the head. Was walking down a street in my city years ago to go to dinner and was one of the first on the scene to see a young man who had committed suicide by jumping off a tall building. It was very sad. I reflected that night on what was important and how desperate a young man must be that suicide was the last option. Was riding with my dad and siblings one morning on our way to school. There's a bridge we drive under every day. That morning we all saw a body hanging from that bridge. When we got home from school, the body was finally in the process of being taken down. I saw a guy's leg shredded by a recycling truck that didn't see him. It was something out of a human anatomy textbook. You could see every muscle and bone from thigh to shin. The poor dude was still alive in extreme pain. As the ambulance came to get him he looked so pale and cold. I found out he died shortly after. Motorcycle rider missing their head. Launched across highway, run over by numerous cars before traffic stopped. Head was removed with helmet. About 8 years ago I working as a train conductor, my locomotive engineer and I hit a young woman with an 8,000-ton freight train traveling 40 miles per hour. After applying the emergency brakes, it was my job to get out and visually check to see if we indeed had an accident. I found her contorted body in seemingly impossible ways near the side of the tracks. I radioed 911 to my dispatcher and emergency services were immediately called. She unfortunately passed away not long after the ambulance arrived. I was no contact with my abusive addict mom for many years. She passed in 2020, a sheriff's deputy found her during a wellness check. It was declared that she had been dead for a couple of weeks in July heat with no utilities. My father and I drove to her house the day after they removed her body. You could smell the decomposition from a block away. She had canceled trash services and had 3+ years of garbage bags piled to the ceiling in her garage. There were rats running all over the house. 99.9% of our family pictures were pissed on or eaten by rats and not salvageable. Both of her toilets were out of order and full to the brim with crap. Everything I saw in her house was absolute nightmare fuel. ER nurse, trauma code on a middle-aged gentleman who wrecked his car, basically dead on arrival and didn't make it. The ambulance that dropped him off had to do a speed clean of the bloody gurney to rush out to another call immediately. 30 minutes later it brings in an old lady who had fallen at home. She kept saying she can't get a hold of her son and he was supposed to take her to the hospital. Turns out her son was the one who wrecked his car on his way to take his mom to the hospital, and she was brought in on their same gurney that her dead son was just laying on moments earlier. That was a gut punch having to tell her the bad news. This was in a rural community with limited ambulance service. I watched a guy get sucker punched outside a club, not uncommon where I used to live, but he fell back and hit his head and a pool of blood started spreading from the back of his head. I always wonder whether he died / had long-lasting damage. My dad, laying dead on the bathroom floor. My best friend and I were supposed to be pet / house sitting, and when we showed up on the first day, the owner, guy who hired us, and his brother were both dead in the house. There was a note and it was ruled a murder-suicide. Younger brother showed up at the house in a drug-fueled rage and older brother didn't know it was him and shot him. Then when he realized who it was, he wrote a note and killed himself. One time I was having a sleepover at my friend's house, and she died in her sleep. Waking up and seeing her was pretty disturbing. Entering a friend's place for the first time without prior knowledge that he was / is a hoarder at age 40. Total shock. Dude has normal job, friends etc., but an absolute hoarder. Dead mice in the flat, trash in the kitchen reaching almost to the ceiling, mold everywhere on one wall of the bedroom. I didn't dare to use the bathroom. Utter shock. Driving in Washington State. Someone in a car the size of a Toyota Corolla went head-on with a semi. There were body parts and goo all over the road, no survivors in the car. They had to get the jaws of life out to get enough remains to have something to bury. Almost 25 years later, seeing a severed hand being picked up by EMS still haunts me.